Hello, I'm Monsignor Jim Lisante. Today on Personally Speaking, I'll be joined by author Bob Dunne. Bob has written an amazingly wonderful new book called 909 Days That Changed the World, which covers the last 2.5 years of Jesus' life that he spent in public ministry. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Monsignor Jim Lisante, and author Bob Dunne joins me now. Bob has written a new book called 909 Days That Changed the World. It's about Jesus' 2.5 years in public ministry. Bob Dunne is a graduate of Columbia University, and he earned his MBA from the University of Chicago. He worked on Wall Street for Salomon Brothers for over 20 years as a fixed-income bond salesman and sales manager. Bob now lives in Princeton Junction, New Jersey. He's married for over 30 years to Paula. They're the parents of Christina, Rob, and Nicole. Bob has always enjoyed writing, and the seeds of this book were sown in the mid-1980s. Many of us know bits and pieces of Jesus' life as we listen to the Gospels at Mass, and this book puts the events of his last years on earth in chronological order as they most likely happened. 909 Days That Changed the World captures Bob Dunne's own struggle to understand the concept that Jesus, the Son of God, was fully human and will help its readers to feel as if they're developing a more personal relationship with Jesus. Joining me now to talk about his book and how it came to be, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking the author, Bob Dunne. We are here with Bob Dunne. He has a wonderful book out called 909 Days That Changed the World about the public ministry of Jesus Christ. His official name is Robert J. Dunne III. Bob, thanks for coming on our show.
Thank you so much for having me today, Monsignor.
I want to ask you, Bob, because I like so much that you have this background in real world, as we'll call it, having worked in the whole Wall Street financial community. When a guy has been in that world, and then he sits down to write a book about the life of Christ, I think people understandably right away say, where did this come from? Tell us the background of you deciding after a very good financial career to say, I'm heading in a new direction. First of all, I'm writing a book. Why I write the book is of intriguing interest to me, and why this topic of all topics. One would expect you to do a great book on finance, not what you wrote about. You give us a beautiful book about Christ. Tell us the background of that decision.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. Back in I guess it was probably the late 70s, early 80s, I became very interested in the writings of John Paul II. He used to give these Wednesday audiences where talking about the theology of the body. And somewhere in there, he said something that really struck me, which was that Jesus Christ came not only to save man from his sins, but also to show man how to be man. And that was really kind of a startling concept for me because I'm a kind of a child of the 60s, and I always really looked upon Jesus Christ as my Savior and not so much as a role model. And so that really got me thinking, and I started thinking about this, and I realized, well, I don't really know that much about Jesus Christ as a man and as a role model. And why is that? I went to Catholic school, grammar school. I went to Catholic high school, go to Mass every Sunday.
Right.
But I realized what it was that I was just getting kind of bits and pieces of Jesus' life in reading the Gospels and hearing the Gospels on Sunday. And I just wasn't able to kind of put it all together. So Jesus Christ to me was my Savior, and the stories I heard about them were all just kind of, they just weren't in order. They were just hard to put all together. So I said to myself, this is back, probably 1983 or 4, I wish I could find a book that could, or something that could show me how Jesus Christ could be my role model. So that sent me off on looking for books or any kind of research that I could get to learn more about Jesus Christ as a human being. And it was a pretty long process, Monsignor, because, I'm married for 30 years. I have 3 children working on Wall Street, and I'm busy working, I'm busy entertaining, I'm busy doing horseback riding lessons with my daughter, softball with my other daughter, and all this stuff. So it took me a long time to kind of work my way through this. But as I did find some books and some research, but and really found that there seems to be a pretty decent consensus as to what the likely chronology of Jesus' life was. But all the stuff was written back in the early 1900s and very, 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 very hard to read because the language was stilted, and mostly it was written with the idea that Jesus Christ really was, and he is, God, but not so much as Jesus Christ as man.
Yes, and that's what your book, 909 Days, I think attempts to do. We're not denying the divinity, but we're getting a much more human view of Jesus than many other books that are out there. Let me ask you, Bob, you're focusing in 909 Days on the public ministry of Jesus. We had as a guest just before you the film director whose new film is out there, The Young Messiah, Cyrus Nowrasteh, and he's basing his book about Jesus as a 7-year-old on the fictional writings of Anne Rice. But I guess I'm wondering, do we know, when you write a book about his public ministry for three years, do we know much about those 30 years that aren't in Scripture?
Well, I don't. I mean, I have read a number of books that that talk about those kind of silent years, but no, I don't really know that much about it. And I've always, I guess, kind of felt that there's been a great message in those 30 years that Jesus spent more or less with his family and more or less just working quietly, and that's probably the importance of all of us just working quietly and doing our best wherever God has put us.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And this guy, Cyrus, has said that what they were attempting to do is to look at him in those public years that you talk about in 909 Days That Changed the World and extrapolate backwards. So say, okay, we see he did this miracle or this particular act of kindness. Now let's take it back to how a 7-year-old might do something similar. Or maybe let's get to the roots of that. But let's go to your reference. One of the things you talk about as the basis for your book is you say people do a lot of grab bag. They hear a gospel in church. They think they know the Gospels, but you're saying it's important to understand the distinctions between the Synoptic Gospels and the Gospel of John. Tell us, first of all, for our listeners who don't know, what are the Synoptic Gospels and what should we be looking for in understanding each brings a particular and important dimension to our understanding of Jesus Christ?
Well, the Synoptic Gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and those are all, they're called synoptic because it means the same. They're all pretty much from the same source, and John, of course, writes his gospel in a totally different way. The things that, when I talk about kind of a grab bag of ideas, what I think for most Christians when they go to church, or even if they're brave enough to read the Gospels one by one, it's just very hard to get a sense of how Jesus' public ministry actually rolled out day by day, week by week, month by month. And so very similar, Monsignor, to like a movie star or a politician even. When you hear bits and pieces about their life, you don't really know the person. And when you want to know about a person, I like American history, loved Abraham Lincoln, learned a lot about him in high school, and took some courses in college about him. And how did I really learn the most about Abraham Lincoln, the man? I read biographies. I read books that kind of helped me go day by day, week by week, month by month, talk about his relationships, how he thought about those relationships, how he dealt with them. And that's what I believe is really missing for most people. And I'm going to say most average Christian people. I mean, some people who, for instance, like yourself, might be very schooled in theology and have studied all this stuff quite a bit, probably know a lot more. But there's a lot of people that go to church very frequently, and some who never go to church, who just have a vision of Jesus Christ as a little bit of a rock star, a little bit of a miracle worker, but not so much a guy who had relationships, a guy that paid attention to details, a guy that really forgave people, a person who didn't judge people, all of those great human qualities that we all admire in people who have them. Jesus Christ had them. And I thought it was really important to put out a book that would be easy for people to read, where those human qualities came kind of shining forth, so that for me, in particular, and for other people, that he could help me become a better father, a better husband, and a better person.
We're talking to Bob Dunne. He's the author of a book called 909 Days That Changed the World, which is about the public ministry of Jesus. What Bob does is he takes what's there, we know what's written, and then gives it a human spin in the best sense. I'm thinking, Bob, of one section you wrote about the experience of being at the tomb of Lazarus, and I love the way you describe the eye play, the interchange between Martha, Mary, and Jesus, and how moved he is by seeing them hurt because he loves them so much, and how beautifully you then take on those two simple words and humanize Jesus. Jesus wept. And what that means, that even though he knows, about the resurrection, and even though he knows about life after life, when you lose a friend, somebody you love deeply, you're going to be hurt. You're going to cry. You don't want to see people you love go through this pain. Doesn't mean you're not a believer. It means you just are empathetic. That empathy of Christ's heart is beautifully, beautifully described by you. And that's just one of many examples in 909 Days That Changed the World. So this is a guy, my guest, ladies and gentlemen, is a guest who has a real sense of not just Jesus' story, but what it means in very human terms. Bob, let's go to something else. You mentioned a few moments ago, I never like to let it pass when it's been mentioned, but, Catholic schools all around the country are struggling to some extent. It's becoming harder and harder to pay tuition for people, and they want to have Catholic schools, but they have their taxes to pay as well. Anyway, you have the experience of having gone through Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school. What was, for Bob Dunne, the impact of that kind of education?
Oh, very simply, it was a culture of faith that was imbued in me, and so I look at things with an eye of faith that I'm very sure, I think I probably wouldn't be doing if it wasn't for that Catholic education. Interestingly enough, Monsignor, we have 3 children, as I said before.
Right.
2 of them graduated from the local public school all the way up and through. Our youngest daughter, who's about 8 years younger than our middle child, as the culture at the public schools has become tougher, has become less Christian, and is even having a hard time becoming human in terms of values, we transferred her out of our local public school, and she went to she's been going to Catholic school since she's in 7th grade.
Okay.
And she's a junior in high school now, and the transformation in her in terms of how comfortable she is with our faith has really been very, very, very gratifying to us.
Wow.
And I think the big reason is because sometimes with our older children, we felt that we were like a voice in the desert as it relates to values. In Notre Dame, she goes to Notre Dame High School in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. At Notre Dame, the values that we all hold, the school supports.
Yeah.
Today's Friday in Lent. They have lunches at Friday. They have lunches served every day, but Friday in Lent, they don't serve meat.
Yeah.
they have confessions available on a weekly basis.
Wow.
They have masses on holy days. One of the children unfortunately died last week, and they had a mass for the child, in school in the middle of the day. Those kinds of supports just help so much for parents like ourselves in a culture where, our faith, of course, is considered to be just worthless.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about bringing that faith into the public square. Bob Dunne, after having gone through Catholic grammar school in high school, then goes to Columbia in New York City, a secular university. When you took yourself out of that Catholic culture and went to a very, very highly secularized world, how poorly did you take the faith as tested in that environment?
My faith was so tested at Columbia University. I just can't tell you because it would take way too long to talk about how my faith had been tested. I think at first I was actually just a touch scandalized at how differently most people were looking at the world, but not only that, how people were almost dismissive of a faith-based answer. And actually, I have to say that one of the great things about Columbia was that it forced me to become more knowledgeable about my faith.
Mm-hmm.
So on my own, I started reading things, Thomas Aquinas and stuff, because people would attack me and attack Christianity, Catholicism, as being unreasonable. And I always, from high school, knew that our faith, it's faith, okay, but it's not unreasonable. Our faith is reasonable. And I thank all the people at Columbia, some of my professors, many of my colleagues, for forcing me to study hard so that I could respond to them and say, you don't have to believe this, okay? But you do have to say this is not unreasonable.
Right. You know, you probably have seen it, but there's a film out there called God Is Not Dead about a student trying to take on one of his professors who is convinced there is no reason for faith, there is no God, and it sounds like you were the living embodiment of the theme of that film. Bob Dunne is our guest. Bob, you know, as I travel around the country, I listen often enough to people telling me what their local priest is not doing right and what's wrong with their parish and all the rest of it. And I listen, but I prefer to obviously turn a negative into a positive. So I understand if it's still your parish, St. David the King Parish has been the parish community for you. What in your parish, where you and Paula go, what do they do right?
Our parish is one that is very very open.
Mm-hmm.
We welcome everyone.
Good.
We have a very, very strong sense of community. We have many, many, many different ministries that are extremely active. My wife, Paula, started the prayer shawl ministry at St. David the King 2 years ago, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it was just in the bulletin last week. They just gave away their 1,000th prayer shawl ministry to people who are either ill or had someone in their family die.
Wow.
And there's just a myriad of different opportunities for people to get involved. And our parish priest, Father Tim Capewell, he's a strong leader as it relates to getting people involved in the church, helping others. And I think that's kind of the mantra. There's not a lot of judgment going on in our church. We'll let Jesus Christ do the judging.
Right.
There's really more of an emphasis on charity, more of an emphasis on giving ourselves to one another and to those in need.
That's wonderful.
I hope that doesn't sound like a corny answer.
No, it really sounds like a good answer, and it's a hopeful answer too.
It's really from the heart, and I think that our church, following up on the message of Pope Francis here, the more that we can talk with people, the more that we can understand people, the more that we can be merciful with people, the more like Jesus Christ we are. Because when I wrote my book, Monsignor, and I really started thinking and praying about Jesus Christ as a human being, it just comes across so strongly the affection and mercy that Jesus has for people. My favorite scene is when he forgives the woman in adultery, who's caught in adultery. And the way that he handles the crowd and the look that he gives her in her eye, to me, just says so much about a man in terms of his mercy and his forgiveness.
Bob Dunne is our guest. That scene he talked about with the woman caught in adultery, of course, is one of many elements of the life of Christ that he talks about in his book called 909 Days That Changed the World. Bob, you have mentioned several times in this interview the relationship you have with Paula over the past 30 years. You know, because we've talked about it before, it's my practice to ask the couples I get to marry or I preside at their wedding. I get to ask them, write me an essay why of all the people, all the possibilities out there, why is this the one? And now you have the perspective now of 30 years of being together. Why do you think the marriage with Paula is right for you?
I think that my wife and I we complement one another in terms of what our areas of expertise are.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been the financial person, and I like school, and I've always liked to write, so I like that stuff. And she's a nurse anesthetist, so she knows everything that a family needs to know about medicine, and she is a wonderful blessing to not only our family when our children get sick, or I sick. I had prostate cancer, and she was an angel for me.
Wow.
But also for our entire family. But I think what really has made our marriage work over the 30 years is that we have always tried to forgive one another whenever the other person has made a mistake, and we have not always succeeded, Monsignor, but I'd say probably 98% of the times we don't go to bed mad.
That's great.
And I think I think forgiveness is really an important part of a marriage, and communication, of course. And the other little practical thing that we do that I would recommend to everyone: take your wife out for a date once a week.
That's a very good thing to do, yes. And it gets lost by too many people who get busy with life with their children and forget to do that. But to keep some element of the dating relationship alive is not a bad thing. Now, you and Paula, as you mentioned, are blessed with these three great children, Christina, Rob, and Nicole. This is a question that always resonates with our listeners around the country who are largely parents and grandparents. How do you take this faith that so obviously means a lot to you, Bob, and plant the seed and nurture the seed in your children so that the benefit that you have received by having a personal encounter with Christ can also be something that sustains them? How do you teach the faith?
I'm glad that our children are the age they are now, because I believe that it's getting harder and harder and harder because of what I referred to before, which is the culture that our children live in, the culture that we live in, is so antithetical of faith. So it gets harder and harder and harder. What my wife and I have always tried to do is the children always came to Mass with us when they were young and at home. To be honest with you, why not?
Yeah.
We used to take them out for brunch after Mass on Sunday.
Whatever works, Bob, whatever works.
And they never complained. And in fact, they never complain now. Even the older two, when they come home, they want to know, okay, what Mass are we going to? And we're going to go to Casey Prime for brunch. But of course, on top of that, we try to do things around the house that always remind all of us of the importance of our faith. What does that mean? We always say grace at meals. We always, when we travel in the car together, even these days, when we go on a road trip and any number of us are in the car, we always say the rosary together. And my wife and I talk about our faith. We don't preach. We try not to preach. I do preach. That's what my wife says. That's what all three of my children say. I preach. So I have to work on not preaching. But we try to just live our faith and
that's the key.
And hope that the seed is there, and which we know it's there. And over time, we believe that they will. I mean, they respond now, and we believe that they will respond going forward in a way that will make them happy. Can I just say one other thing?
Sure.
Because this is what I believe, and this is what I do say to my children, because I believe this is true. The faith is really not something that is a requirement. The truth is, we are hardwired to have faith and to love God and love one another. And if we do that, if I do that, I'm a happier man.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for everyone.
I think you're right, and I'm always mystified when I listen to folks who are, with Atheists of America or anybody who rejects church and God and all this stuff, that they're never happy about it. They're so angry at us for believing, and I never know where the anger comes from. But I think you're saying that when you give yourself over to faith, it does in some ways lift the heart and lift the mind and make you a fundamentally happier person. It certainly has done that for me. That's not to say that there haven't been times in even our Catholic Church's history where we've, I think, helped to make people neurotic by making the legalisms of church more important than the message of what does Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What are his teachings? Where's the humanity behind the man? And that's why I love Bob Dunne's book, 909 Days That Changed the World, because he highlights what really should be at the heart of anybody's belief system.
Yes.
I want to thank Bob Dunne for being with us. I'm very interested in having his book, 909 Days That Changed the World, get into more hands. So, Bob, how do they get hold of the book?
Well, the book is available from Amazon, from my publisher, Leone Press. This is actually a self-published book.
Okay.
I paid for the book to be published because I thought it was a book that needs to be written.
Okay.
So you can get it from Amazon, Leone Press, Leone Press, or it can also be bought on Barnes & Noble. The book is also available electronically on Nook and Kindle.
That's great. And maybe I can add to what Bob Dunne is saying. I had Bob Dunne come to my parish one weekend and mention the book to our people, had a number of people purchase the book at the church. And what's been happy for me is that, people took it home and actually read it, and that it has given people who had copies of the book a deeper, richer understanding of Christ. So having brought Bob, into our parish and had him share his book with others, I've already seen the beautiful fruit that it's borne. So as someone who has actually seen the value of his book, I hope that people around the country will get it. Bob, our best to Paula, to the kids, and to you. Thank you for writing this book and for your witness humbly to Christ.
Thank you so much, Monsignor, and best wishes to you and your family, your mother, and everyone else, your great parishioners, for a healthy and a holy and a happy Easter season.
Thank you, Bob. As we end today's program, I want to thank you all for being with us. If you have any questions or comments about the show, you can send them to me through my website, which is MonsignorLisante.org, MSGRLISANTE.org. To listen to past Personally Speaking episodes, please go to www.closeencountertv.com and click on the radio button at the top of the page. Please be sure to visit the site and encourage your family and friends to do that too. We are here because of the sponsorship of something called the Catholic Grandparents Association, and they're great. They're doing wonderful work to help Catholic grandparents pass on the faith to their grandchildren. I'd like to encourage you to think about going to them at CatholicGrandparentsAssociation.org. That's all one word, CatholicGrandparentsAssociation.org, and learning more about the wonderful work they do. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Our engineer is Brian Bonifacio. Our audio facility is Creative Audio Post in New York City. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.